time. Hi, or your 100 and I don't know 1,000th time, whatever time it is for you. You're so welcome. We're so glad we're together. We are a virtual community, whether we can see your face on the Zoom or not. Um, you're very much part of our community tonight as we create a Kehila Kadosha, a sacred community. Bound by our energy and our connection to what binds us together, to our Jewish people, to our heritage, our rituals, our story, our history. This is the week of Yom HaShoah, and so we are really thrilled tonight to be able to have another really wonderful and enlightening topic that will engage with a really wonderful speaker and teacher, Professor Natasha Goldman, who's one of our members, and she's here on the Zoom, and she'll be speaking with us. And we're going to do a slightly abbreviated service so that we can have time for Natasha's talk at the end. So I hope everyone can stay, even if you're having your dinner at the same time, that's perfectly fine. And then we can have some Q&A, and we'll get to hear about the history of memorializing the Holocaust in the United States, and specifically public memorial, a public memorial that was erected in Philadelphia, and that was the first one of its kind. And so there's a really interesting story there. So this is that time of year where we move through a cycle of profound emotion through Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and then Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, and then Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. So that's where we're situated. We're also in the time of the counting of the Omer. Tonight we enter into the 13th day of the Omer. So we're just about 2 weeks through it. And we are, so that means we're marching towards Mount Sinai, and we're going from liberation to revelation. From freedom to what is that freedom for? That freedom is for us to live a certain way in this world and have a job as God's active partner in this world. So that was a lot of words of introduction, but I like to situate us where we are in Jewish time. And so let's just take some nice deep breaths together and let go of the week. And if you want to try rolling your shoulders back a little bit so that you have more physical space to be open and receptive, to have some actual space, heart space, and maybe we could call it soul space for the receiving of Shabbat. That is what Kabbalat Shabbat means. That's the name of this first part of our service tonight. And as part of reminding ourselves that we are here each in our Zoom square, but we are very much connected as a community. I would love it if you would maybe write in the chat even just a word or two about how you're feeling right now. So where you're coming from in that sense, and in a geographical sense, if you're somewhere maybe not near Boston. And then those of you who are watching on Facebook, you also have the Facebook chat available to you and the comments. And I would just love to know you're out there. So if you are watching us on Facebook and could just say hello or Shabbat Shalom or anything you want to share, and even if you want to share how you're doing, where you're coming from, let us know, because it's hard to know who's out there with us. And you, like I said before, you're very much with us. So let's, with that nice openness of soul and heart, and hopefully our lungs are nice and open tonight, let's move into Shabbat and move into this sacred time with candle lighting. Tonight we will have, or I think we already have, the digital prayer book in the chat. The link to that is available to you if you want to follow along that way. And if you have a book at home and want to look at the candle blessings, we're on page 2. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של Shabbat. Tonight we'll welcome in Shabbat with Yedid Nefesh, a beautiful love poem, love prayer, you might call it. In the prayer book, it's on page 332. There are many stanzas. We're just going to do one of them. This first stanza at the top of page 332 means, heart's delight, source of mercy, draw your servant into your arms. I leap like a deer to stand in awe before you. Your love is sweeter to me than the taste of honey. Lots of echoes of our book in the Hebrew Bible, the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. And many of you may not know the words, so just yai-da-dai along with us and see if you can enjoy the melody. Yedid nefesh av harachaman mishoch avdecha eretzonecha yarutz avdecha kemo ayal ישתחווה אל מול הדרך ירב לו ידידותך מנופת צוף וכל טעם yada dai 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 yada dai 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 yada dai 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 yada dai dai yada dai 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 yada dai 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 yada dai 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 yada dai. Going to sing one of the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, Psalm 29. We're on page 18 in the prayer book, and I'm thrilled to have the music of Andy O'Connell tonight to accompany us. Mizmor leDavid, havu l'Adonai bnei Elim. Havu l'Adonai kavod va'oz yai lai lai. Havu l'Adonai kevod shemo yishtachavu l'Adonai behadrat kodesh. Kol Adonai al hamayim el hakavod yirim. Adonai al mayim rabim. Kol Adonai bakoach yai lai lai. Kol Adonai behadar. Kol Adonai shover arazim vayishaber Adonai et arze halvanon vayarkidem kemo egel levanon vesiryon kemo venreimim. Going to turn to page 20 and 21, and we're going to just do actually an a cappella lechadodi. Actually, so we're going to do not our Hallelujah melody. I thought we'd mix it up tonight. And my accompanist, who I thought was off for the entire evening, has just arrived in the nick of time to play along with me. He'll be off camera, but he will be playing, and hopefully you can hear him okay. We're going to sing the Yadadai, Yadadai, Yadadai. That's what I call this version of Lecha Dodi. We're on pages 20 and 21, verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. When we get to verse 9, we'll rise and bow and symbolically greet the great guest of honor, Shabbat itself. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor v'dibur echad, ishmi'anu el hamiuchad. Adonai echad u'shmo echad, l'shem u'tiferet ve'litzila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki hi mekor haberacha. Merosh mikedem mesucha, sof maaseh b'machshavat tchila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Verse 5. Itoreri, itoreri, ki va'orech kumi ori. Uri, uri, shir daberi, kevod Adonai alayich nigla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bana, gam besimcha uvetzora. Toch emunei am segula, boi chala, boi chala. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Yadadai, 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. So who had something awesome happen to them this past week? Awesome in the colloquial sense or awe-inspiring? Let us know in the chat. The buds have come out on the trees. That's mine. I'll never stop being awestruck by that. I hope I never do, I should say. We're at the top of page 342 for our Magadlu round. Wow, all right, we're hearing about baby Austin who started crawling. That is awe-inspiring indeed. Yeah, look out for sure. Look out for Austin. He is coming for us. A cute bunny. I saw 4 cute bunnies today. Lisa, you saw a cute bunny too. All right, they are everywhere. All right, keep them coming. some of us just sing hallelujah, or you can sing the words. Hallelujah, 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 Magadu, Maasechaya. Another source of awe is that we can all be together, we can hear each other, we can see each other if we're on Zoom. Imagine if we had had to navigate this time without that ability. It is such a blessing. And so to remind ourselves of how connected we are, I'm going to invite you to unmute we're going to go into Baruch Hu now on page 28. And I'll invite you, if you wish, on the Zoom to unmute yourselves for the response so that we can hear each other, though we won't be exactly in sync, and that's okay. As we hope and pray, move closer to the time when we will hear each other's voices in real time, synchronized. Barechu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach. Leolam va'ed. Baruch Adonai hamevorach. Leolam va'ed. Okay, it may have been that people could not unmute. Okay, so we'll do that. It's okay. We're going to have another chance. We're going to do that for the Shema. So sorry about that. We're going to be on page 30 now, giving thanks for the cycles of light and dark, of day and night and season. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו, לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב Aravim. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening. Page 32. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. And you are welcome to unmute now for the Shema on page 34. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Baruch Shem
We're on page 36 for V'ahavta. I'd ask that everybody mute once again. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך. ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בעם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's turn to Mi Chamocha on page 40. Mi chamocha bailim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osei fele, nora tehilot osei fele. Yai lai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai. Malchutecha ra'u vanecha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe uMiriam. Ze'eli anu ve'ameru Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני קהל ישראל. So at this time we will sing our lullaby blessing, at least that's what I call it. Let us lie down in peace. Let us wake up tomorrow to new life. May we honor those cycles that our bodies and our souls need of wakefulness and rest, of activity and rest, and wakefulness and sleep, that mirror the cycles of seasons and night and day. Cycles are so important, and when we try to resist them, it doesn't tend to go well for us. We have rhythms built into our bodies that would like to be honored, and we can usually tell when we're not honoring them. So let's remember that at one time, our world, when the sun went down, was dark. And there was fire, at least for some part of history. But other than that, it was a dark world. It was a quiet world. And our ancestors came up with a beautiful prayer. Hashkivenu, we're on page 42. And Andy will accompany us for Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Ushmor tzedenu uvoenu lechayim ulshalom Thank you so much, Andy, for your beautiful music. We're going to have the chance to introduce our Amidah, our standing prayer, so we'll rise in body or spirit as we're able. This is one of the very first times that instead of recognizing that we need rain, because it's the rainy season in Israel, the land of Israel for that half of the year, we now begin to honor that there is dew, tal, that appears in the warmer months. And so we say in our Amidah blessing, Morid Hatal, the one who, God as the one who brings down the dew. So I just want to recognize again on that theme of cycles and honoring them. It really is an amazing thing that we change the words of our prayers depending on where we are in our seasons, even though these are prayers that we say every day and every week. So we'll start on page 46, and then we'll say our first three blessings together before concluding with a prayer for peace. Adonai, sefatai tiftach, ufi agir tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Please take some moments for individual prayer. We'll join back together with our prayer for peace. Ohabei Shalom. Ohabei Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru imeru amen. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. At this time we call to heart and call to mind those who are in need of healing of body or of spirit. As we pray the Mishaberach Lecholim, we offer this blessing for those who are ill. We think of the many thousands who are suffering in our country and around the world, being ill with COVID-19, and so many others. So if you're on the Zoom or on Facebook and want to let us know in the chat for whom you're praying tonight, those you know and love, and maybe those you don't know, feel free to bring them into our virtual sanctuary. And I'm going to mention some names from our community or connected to our community. Tonight we are praying for Allison Rim, Anita Kulik, Judy Goldberg, Eileen Schwartz, Richard and Margit Hershey, Karen Shea, Doug and Mila Krynick, Mitch Balin, Aaron Page, Sydney Jean Pisetsky, Naomi Fisher, Naomi Batsipora Yosef, Isaiah Jackson, Tammy Griffin, and Brent Cantor. And all those who we've named here and who we've named in our homes. If we're not connected to the chat feature or that's not accessible to us, I would recommend that you say the name aloud or names aloud in your own space. I think there's some power in that. And we'll go into our prayer, this time again accompanied by Andy. The Mishaberach is on page 253. Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha La'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. So we're going to turn to Aleinu now. A reminder, if you weren't here at the beginning and don't know about this, we're having, in place of a Devar Torah tonight, we're going to have a wonderful talk by one of our own members, Professor Natasha Goldman, following services. So we're going to wrap up our service in just a few minutes so that she can share with us her wisdom about Holocaust memorials, and then we'll have some chance for Q&A. So at this time, we're going to turn to Aleinu on page 282. Please rise in body or spirit. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגופי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. In a moment, we're going to recite Mourner's Kaddish. I see some of you who are in a first year of mourning for a parent, and I know others are marking yard sites. We're going to share our community yard site list on the screen, and we're also going to share the words of Mourner's Kaddish on the screen, so that even if you don't have a prayer book, you're going to be able to follow along with me, and I hope that that's large enough for everyone to see who is reciting Mourner's Kaddish tonight. Of course, it's you should do as is your custom if you are not reciting Mourner's Kaddish for someone in particular, but it is your practice to recite it along with the community. That is, of course, your choice. So please do put into the chat if you would like to and are able to, those you're remembering. And again, if you're at home and want to just bring those names into your space by saying them aloud. I know that we're remembering, connected to our community tonight, the recent death of Luz Maria Salamanca and our beloved Peter Feldman. I see the Feldmans here. So thank you for sharing these names, and I hope that their memory is a blessing, and that we, this week in particular, of course, also we also think of our 6 million siblings, our ancestors who perished in the Shoah. And we recite Mourner's Kaddish. If you prefer to be in the book, we're on page 294. Yitgadal ve'yit kadash shemei rabah bi'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'v'zman koriv ve'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mivorach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma ve'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. to share a couple of announcements before we'll conclude the prayer part of this evening and move into our speaker for the evening. Tomorrow morning, we'll have a joint service with our friends at Shir Hadash, a Shabbat morning service. We'll start at 10:15 if anyone wants to come and schmooze and get to know members of our sister community, Shir Hadash. If you haven't already, I can vouch for them. They're excellent folks. Many of you already know many of them because we've been in this partnership for a couple of years. So please do join us 10:15 or at 10:30 for the start of services tomorrow. Services will include a Torah reading and also a brief Torah study, which will be led by Rabbi Schaefer. And there are, I'm sure, other things to announce, but for now, I will just say that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are in this season of, I've heard it called the Israeli High Holy Days. So meaning the days of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day or Remembrance Day, Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, and Yom HaAtzmaut is Israel's Independence Day. And they all come in very quick succession. Well, especially Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, which are literally back to back. And we observed Yom HaShoah as a community on Wednesday night. Some of you were there for that service, and also our speaker who taught us about the Jewish community of Shanghai and the incredible story of Sugihara, the Japanese ambassador to Lithuania, who wrote visas for so many Jews. So we heard that story, not a very well-known story, and about the Jews of Shanghai. And tonight we'll hear another story that is, I am guessing, not very well known to most of you. So what we're going to do is conclude tonight's service with Eli Eli, or otherwise known as Halacha L'Cesaria, by Hannah Senesh, the very young girl, the paratrooper who tried to, she was on the right side of history, and but very horribly captured by the Nazis and killed. And she wrote beautiful poetry, and some of them have been turned into beautiful melodies. So we're on page 349 as we honor Yom HaShoah and Ugvura, the day of remembering the Holocaust, and also Gevura, strength, persistence, resistance, perseverance that our people had in unimaginable circumstances to hold on to each other in whatever way that they could, and to hold on to our people's story and rituals, even in the darkness of concentration camps and throughout that period of our history. So this week we remember them with the story that we'll hear from Professor Goldman, and also with this beautiful song. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer le'olam, hachol ve'hayam, rish rush shel hamayim, berak Hashamayim, tefilat Adam, achor ve'hayam, rish rush shel hamayim, berak Hashamayim, tefilat Adam. Oh God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. Okay, so I'm going to now formally introduce Natasha Goldman. Dr. Natasha Goldman is an art historian and research associate at Bowdoin College, and she's the president of Wiesen Inc., a boutique higher education consultancy. We're thrilled that her family, which consists of her husband Joachim and Tobias and Adam, have joined our community. Not only joined our community, but they joined us during the course of the pandemic. So we're so glad that you've joined us and can't wait to welcome you into our building in 3D. So Natasha has published a really wonderful book. I haven't finished it, but it is really enlightening. It's called Memory Passages, Holocaust Memorials in the United States and Germany. It was published in 2020. And she was awarded in 2018 and 2020, along with co-director Paige Herlinger, an NEH summer seminar for school teachers on the topic of teaching the Holocaust through visual culture. I was really excited to connect with Natasha because the summer after I graduated from college, I was an intern at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And that was really important to me. And I later worked at the New York's Holocaust Museum, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I was working there for 2 years, from 2000 to 2002. And so this is a topic that has always been important to me and really, really interesting. How do we talk about the Holocaust? How do we remember it? Where is it in our public discourse? And for many, many years, it was not in our public discourse. So Natasha tonight is going to speak about Nathan Rappaport's Monument to the 6 Million, which was built in 1964 in Philadelphia. And so I'm going to let her tell you all the interesting stories about this, and then she'll speak for maybe a half an hour, and we'll have some time for Q&A afterwards. And again, I am guessing that Natasha would be fine with everybody. If you need to eat dinner while you're listening, then just consider it a Shabbat table conversation, and that's fine too. So Natasha, Professor Goldman, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Rabbi, and thank you for that really, really lovely introduction. So glad to be with you here tonight and really honored to speak with you about some of the research I've done. And I hope that it's new to you and that you learned something, a really, really fascinating story to share with you. And can you see my screen? Wonderful. Okay. In honor of Yom HaShoah, I'd like to share with you tonight a fascinating story of Holocaust memory and community in the context of Philadelphia's 1964 Holocaust Memorial called the Monument to the 6 Million. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to move myself to my next. Nope, that's not going to work. Sorry, 1 second.
No problem. If you're having trouble, Natasha, we can have Josh share it as well. If you're
I just need to move forward in my screen.
Okay.
There we go. Called the Monument to the 6 Million Martyrs, designed by the Polish Jewish sculptor Nathan Rappaport, and located at the corner of Benjamin Franklin Parkway and 16th and Arch Streets in Philadelphia. I'm guessing that you don't know this memorial because I have given this lecture quite a few times and very few people in the audience even recognizing it. But you may be familiar with some other fairly or more well-known memorials, all of which were built in the 1980s. This one, George Siegel's The Holocaust, 1984, using a modernist, postmodernist idiom of painted bronzes figures cast from friends of the artist. You know Boston's Holocaust Memorial, 1985. Kenneth Treister's sculpture of Love and Anguish, 1985 in Miami. And perhaps you know Joel Shapiro's Loss and Regeneration, 2 sculptures outside of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in 1993. And maybe you know Andy Goldsworthy's Garden of Stones from 2003 at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. I write about all these in my book, but today I want to focus on Rappaport's Monument to the 6 Million because I find it quite fascinating that it was built in 1964, that hardly any of us know about it. I like to say that it's hidden in plain sight. And I'd like to investigate two things with you today. One, why is it that it has been overlooked in Holocaust memory in the United States, both in scholarly literature and in the public sphere among folks like you? And how did it come about that a memorial like this could have even been built in the 1960s when so many of the others that we know date from the 1980s? So first, I'll just say that the story involves famous sculptor Nathan Rappaport. You may know this work of art, his Warsaw Ghetto Uprising Monument, which he designed when he was in the Soviet Union, and it was built in 1948. It depicts Mordechai Anielewicz, the hero of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, on the front, amongst various other figures. In high relief, that means that the sculptural forms seem to be walking out into our space. And on the verso is the martyr relief in very low relief. That is, the figures are hardly emerging from the wall, and they are marching towards their certain death. The figure in the center carries a Torah, and you can see the swords, the bayonets of the soldiers and their hats in the background, while the figures slump forward and move in one direction. The sculpture was so famous and so beloved that Yad Vashem copied it and changed the Torah to the menorah for the installation at Yad Vashem, the Israeli site of Holocaust memory, where all members of the army go in remembrance of Yom HaShoah, in fact, and have a service in front of the copy of this memorial that's located in Israel. So the story that I'll tell today involves this artist, as well as a group of Holocaust survivors in Philadelphia, led by Abram Schnapper, a survivor, the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia, and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Philadelphia, different Jewish groups who came together to advocate for Holocaust memory in the city of Philadelphia. So why has it been overlooked? One of the reasons, I think, is that this sculpture consists of an amalgamation of both representational elements, that is, elements that we can recognize from the world, as well as some abstract elements. So if we start to examine it, we have a female figure on the bottom who's fairly massive. And above her, we have various forms. Here is the leg of a figure who belongs to a figure we call the rabbi, who's wearing his traditional garb with his hands outstretched, the signs of the blessing. And we have flames at the top and these abstract forms, which seem to be perhaps barbed wire. Here's a close-up of that figure on the bottom. There's a little child who's almost emerging from his mother. And there's a very abstract detail right over here of a mother holding a child. So highly abstract in some cases. And in other cases, there's more detailed figuration. For example, over here, the hand that's holding the Torah is so detailed that you can see the veins of the hand, whereas that mother and child are highly abstracted so that you just see forms and you just get a slight impression of who these figures are. Here's a detail of the top where we have hands with swords, so symbols of resistance, and the flames have been suggested to be flames of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, flames of the menorah. They can be seen symbolically and in various kinds of ways. But when you look at this sculpture from a distance, this amalgamation of different forms, I think, is very, very hard to decipher. Why would Nathan Rappaport choose to make a sculpture like this at this particular moment in time? Well, what I want to suggest to you is that we didn't really have a visual vocabulary for memorializing the Holocaust in the United States in the 1960s. We had Rappaport's Warsaw Ghetto Monument in the 1940s in Poland, but that's a very different cultural moment, right? Communist Poland doesn't really make sense for United States in the 1960s. So there wasn't a lot of visual material to work with. There was certainly a lot of written material, but not a lot of visual material, and certainly not a lot of visual material in public space. So I think he was trying to invent something. And when you try to invent something, it's hard. It's not easy. And to me, this memorial, while historically significant, aesthetically is not so successful because it doesn't tell a story in such a way that's easy to decipher. Another example of that is the base of the memorial. Sorry, I wanted to put in an image of the base. I can go back up to the top. The base is a brown granite, and it's very hard to read the inscription. So you have to get very, very close even to see it. And I think that also makes it confusing for the viewer when they walk by to understand what it says. But inscribed on that base, it says, presented to the City of Philadelphia, the Association of Jewish New Americans, in cooperation with the Federation of Jewish Agencies of Greater Philadelphia, April 26, 1964. Jewish New Americans, for those of you who don't know, was the phrase used by Holocaust survivors. That phrase Holocaust survivor did not become prevalent in the United States until the 1980s. There were about 12 such Jewish New Americans groups in the US in the 1950s and 60s. They were mostly made up of poor immigrants. The Jewish Federation in Philadelphia, on the other hand, consisted of established German Jews who'd been in the city since the 19th century and who were philanthropists with close ties to City Hall. They were notorious for looking down their noses at the survivors. So how did they work together to establish this memorial? In pursuit of the answer, I visited Abe Schnapper, now deceased, the survivor who got the whole movement going for this memorial. Schnapper had founded the Association of Jewish New Americans and led the campaign to commission the monument. He had known the artist Nathan Rappaport from his teenage years in Poland, when they were both members of Hashomer Hatzair, a Zionist youth organization. Abe had carefully bound all documents related to the monument, including letters, telegrams, photographs, and newspaper clippings. He was a bookbinder by trade in Poland. When he came to the United States, Abe Schnapper worked in the Philadelphia Public Library in the bookbinding department, and it was in that department that he bound all the materials related to the monument for his own use. But I still couldn't quite figure out from his documents how these two groups, the poor Holocaust survivors, the new Jewish Americans, were able to work together with the Jewish Federation, this long-established philanthropic German Jewish group of men, primarily men, but also women in Philadelphia. After a couple days of research in the archives of the Jewish Community Relations Council at Temple University, I came across my answer. One man was the go-between between the two groups. His name was Dalk Feith, a Jew from Galicia, or present-day Poland. It's his story that I want to focus on now, for sometimes it's just one person who can galvanize Holocaust memory for an entire city. At the outbreak of World War II, Feith had left Galicia and worked as a sailor on merchant marine ships, so he was on a boat when the war broke out. He was trained by the British Merchant Marine to become a marine engineer. In 1942, at a time when Jews were not allowed into the US, Feith illegally disembarked from an Ethiopian merchant marine ship in Baltimore. Hearing that there was a large Jewish population in Philadelphia, he took a train there and declared himself at the customs house. Learning that he was a marine engineer, customs immediately gave him a job at the Philadelphia U.S. Navy Yard until the end of the war. In 1945, he, along with many other Jewish survivors, I have to admit someone, along with many other Jewish survivors, was assigned a social worker through HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. The social worker's job was to make sure that the displaced persons could speak English and get a job. Feith's social worker said to him, "I have a machine for making metal boxes. I don't know what you'll do with the boxes, but maybe you can make some money." So Feith started making metal boxes. And he was soon after approached by an electronics company that wanted to put their electronics into his metal boxes. If you can guess what those metal boxes became, they became the early cable TV boxes. Feith went on to make the boxes, and he bought stocks in the electronics company that made the electronics that went into the boxes. Within 15 years, this Holocaust survivor became a great Jewish philanthropist in Philadelphia. By the time of the Monuments Commission in 1961, Feith was on the board of the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia. So he was a survivor, although according to his family, he never thought of himself as such, and he was a successful businessman. In a 1985 videotaped interview, he relates how it was his job, on behalf of the Association of New Jewish Americans to approach his fellow board members of the Federation and ask for funds to support the monument. The Jewish New Americans and the Federation were to split the total cost of $47,000, but the Federation was not interested in the project. Fife relates his experience of approaching the board and asking for funds in a 1985 videotaped interview. My main problem was that the opposition came from the Federation. At that time, I was a little macher. People meant well, but didn't have the understanding. 6 million Jews deserve a monument. I was told at the Federation, by the executive committee and by the board, they told me they need hospitals and let's look forward. I had to be very diplomatic. I hate to tell you what I wanted to say, but I wanted to win. And in order to win, you have to keep your mouth closed. But I stood up to some people and I apologized to some people. And finally, I won it. I'm very proud of that money. The monument was the first one in the United States of its kind. Fife noted that the Federation was once under the domination of the German Jews. The interviewer asks, were there still remnants of that kind of thing in the 1960s? And Fife answers, you always had that kind of thing around. Fife not only arranged a major gift from the Federation for the monument, he donated money himself. Rappaport recalled in 1984 that, quote, one man saved the hour through his generosity and commitment to the project. Fife, a Jewish communal leader, contributed the remaining funds needed to complete the monument. Fife's donation did not go unnoticed by Schnapper, who wrote a letter to Fife. Our sages have written there are 3 crowns, the crown of learning, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. However, the crown of good name excels them all because it alone is a tribute to the personality and character of the man. It was this crown that you lent us when you elected to work with our Association of Jewish New Americans in bringing our great dream to realization. We know we must thank you from the very depths of our hearts, because together with our strenuous efforts and all the valuable time you so generally gave our project, it was the well-earned goodness of your name, truly a crown, which in the end brought our monument to recognition to the entire community. What a beautiful thank you note. The son of Abe Schnapper tells me that most likely it was Abe's wife, not Abe, who wrote the letter. By December 1964, the Jewish New Americans and the Federation had each contributed about 13,000. Other contributions totaled a little over 21,000. With interest earned, the total fund raised was 47,000. Rappaport was paid 40,000. While the exact amount of Fife's contribution is unclear, the association was 40% short of their goal. It's reasonable to assume that Fife's personal donation made up for that shortfall. So Fife was a self-proclaimed macher, and to Schnapper, Fife was also a mensch. The Federation and the survivors had to work together, but one person needed to bring those disparate groups together. After the monument was constructed, the commissioners realized that outside of Yom HaShoah, no one was visiting the monument. In fact, it did not appear on a book of Philadelphia public art until 1991. There might be many reasons for this. At the time, the monument was located on a triangular plaza at a busy intersection. The inscription on the brown granite is hard to read, and the artist uses an array of artistic styles, including here, the highly representational hand holding the Torah, the mother and the child, and the other figures I showed earlier, making the figures hard to decipher. The Jewish Community Relations Council undertook to create a committee that would spread awareness of the monument to the public. But it did more than that. Within 1 year, it spoke out during incidents of anti-Semitism, such as David Duke's interview on local TV, provided bookshelves for schools, a program of free books on the Holocaust for public schools, and most importantly, it worked to establish the first Holocaust education curriculum in the city of Philadelphia, taught in public and parochial schools. So while the memorial was overlooked by the public, the committee responsible for it made certain that the Holocaust was being taught to the city's children. In a letter Schnapper wrote just after the dedication of the monument in a letter to Schnapper written after the dedication, Rappaport wrote, "The uprising in the ghetto has taught us, never bow your head, be helpful, and fight for justice and righteousness. While the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising does not play the role in Jewish life and memory as it once did in the 1960s, Rappaport's words, never bow your head, be helpful, and fight for justice and righteousness, are words that ring true even today." Since 2018, the monument is no longer hidden in plain sight. A new generation of Jewish philanthropists, Dalk Feith's daughter, Debbie Feith, among others, came together to redesign the plaza. They hired an architect and worked with historians. And you can see here that the monument is still at the top of that triangle park, but it's no longer an empty plaza. We now have a wall of information, these 6 pillars of information over here, a tree from Theresienstadt, a grove of trees that's symbolic of life, and also some railroad ties from one of the concentration camps. And there is a beautiful website, which I wrote here, which you can visit and go through all of the different slides. So while forgotten for many years and non-existent in the literature on Holocaust memory, I still think it plays a vital role for us. It tells us how disparate groups of Jewish community members who often didn't get along well work together to make this work happen. How one person who's able to bridge different groups can make an enormous impact on a city, and how a group of supporters of the monument spread education and Jewish awareness throughout the city, working closely together with the Catholic diocese. The plaza today, I think, is an indication that the monument is still important for us today, that Holocaust memory is still important for the city. And now when one Googles Nathan Rappaport and the monument to the 6 million, it's all over the web because of the redesign of this plaza. So memory is alive and gets reinterpreted throughout time and in different visual means. And I'd love to take your questions if you have any.
So if you want to raise your hand, I'll look around screens. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat. I'll look out for any of those and then I can relay them. Larry.
Thank you, Natasha. That was a wonderful presentation and welcome to the TOS community. We look forward to seeing you in person. I have a question for you as someone who knows about art. I was just really intrigued by the abstract combined with the very detailed, and I'm wondering if one explanation here is the very detailed showing the individual suffering, and maybe the abstract is more intended to show the multitudes here, the huge numbers that were involved here.
I think
Any thought about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good interpretation. Absolutely. If we go back to the top, memorials that are abstract in nature tend to leave interpretation more open, right? They tend to let us really think about and make associations that we would like to explore for ourselves. So one might notice that Joel Shapiro's little loss is actually a kind of a house, almost like a child would make a house turned upside down. Joel Shapiro had been working with figures for decades already. And the first one he did in this manner was actually for the death of his sister who died in an accident. He designs, by the way, the illustrations in one of the Sidors for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. I'm not sure if we use that or not.
Yes, it's in our.
Yes. So he does. It was his first print project, and he's a sculptor. So he uses abstraction precisely for that reason, because he wants to open up meaning. Figuration often directs us in significant ways towards meaning. And Kenneth Treister's sculpture of love and anguish from Miami, I think, is more in that vein. You have there's not a lot open to question here. There's not a lot of ways you can escape this memorial. Really, you're stuck in the meaning of it. And I think that Rappaport was grappling with a bunch of different things. One of them was that, he's working in the 1960s where there's a real upsurge in modernism, of minimalist art, of conceptual art. So he's working at a time when there are a lot more possibilities of what an artist can do. And I think that he was struggling through that. He was trained as a realist, figurative artist. He was trained that way in the Warsaw Academy of Art. He continued to work that way and survived the war when he was in Russia. And after the war, goes back to Poland. He's in New York for a time, and then he goes to Israel. So he's in that post-war time when artists are trying to work through things. But if you're coming out of a realist tradition of figuration, it must have been really hard to come up with a new way to define. But I think you're right. Abstraction leads to openings for interpretation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I saw a question in the chat from Spence. Do you know the material on the 6 columns? I think that's on the plaza in Philadelphia.
Oh, the material. Let's see. Off the top of my head, I don't. Over here, you mean? I'm wondering
Yeah,
if
it
they're
looks like
black granite. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it's a black granite, but the website is really quite nice. It takes you to the picture, and then you can click on various things. So here are the 6 pillars. You can click on that. Let's see if it gives us the text. That's the thing about Holocaust memorials, is that they're not always seen as works of art. They're more seen as works of history. So you don't always get things like, well, what is the material that's being used? One has to dig for that. But I'm assuming it's granite.
Thank you. All right. Other questions? Okay.
Has anyone seen it? Has anyone is from Philadelphia?
I was telling Natasha that I lived in Philadelphia for 5 years and I probably did walk by it and I didn't live in Center City, but I don't recall ever seeing it. So hidden in plain sight.
Excuse me, I'm from Philadelphia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm on my phone. I'm Heather Platt, and I'm from Philadelphia originally. I never remember visiting this sculpture before, and I think it was because it wasn't like that before. It was just a little, in the middle of nowhere. I mean, not having the whole landscape, but my family, they grew up in Philadelphia. We didn't know, so I'm gonna make a point of visiting it. Try to visit it this year if I can, when I go home, and see if some of my family might want to come with me. I'm very excited about this.
I'm so glad that it inspires you to do that. It is at the corner of that street. That's sort of the Barnes collection is right down the street. The Philadelphia Museum of Art is right down the street. It's really at a fantastic location, and definitely worth the trip. There's a lot of other things to visit in that area if you do go to it.
Thank you so much for bringing this work up.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Heather. Alan Chepro.
Hi, everybody. I was looking at the picture of the plaza, and the wall in the back of the plaza seems to resemble the wall of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. Is there a coincidence, or am I just seeing things? Or
do you mean in this photo, or do you mean in the new reconstruction of the plaza?
The reconstruction of the plaza.
The reconstruction of the plaza. That's a very smart thing to notice. Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial was watershed memorial architecture. There's no question about that. Made in 1982. And I think that any kind of a memorial that invokes that V structure with this is a gray color, it's not dark. The Maya Lin's, of course, is cut into the earth. So there's soil up above here. You sort of walk to the edge and you walk down into the memorial. But absolutely, it is. That's a really smart association to bring up. I don't think it's by accident.
Thank you.
Spence.
Hi, Natasha. I was not asking about what the material was. I was asking about the substance of what was written.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question, Spence.
On that same wall that Alan was just asking about, as well as those 6 columns. I wondered if 6 columns had to do with the camps.
Yes, exactly. So on the website, it provides the full text. Human equality, the master race, American democracy, totalitarianism, natural rights, Nuremberg laws, freedom of religion, religious persecution, protecting life and liberty, death camps, liberation, bearing witness. So a lot more than 6 topics are covered. It's interesting because I think that the link to things like protecting life and liberty and democracy, that the committee for this, the Reconceived Plaza, which was finished, I believe, in 2018, was really trying to link it to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love and to American history. So this monument becomes very much part of American history when we look a little closer at the text on those walls. And it is really fascinating the way that plaques are used in memorial spaces. They're really quite revealing. If we go back to that other, you had also asked about the other wall. This is they have it listed here as the eternal flame. Let's have a look. So there's an eternal flame here that's lit, and it doesn't give us more information. So I don't know what's written on the other side, unfortunately. Worth a visit.
I see a question in the chat. Is this near the Philadelphia American Jewish Museum?
So the Philadelphia American Jewish Museum is not far away, and that museum actually contains a small maquette or a model that Rappaport used in order to create this. So they have one of the earlier versions, which is quite abstract looking. It doesn't have a lot of detail at all. It's very abstract looking. And the story about that is that when the commissioners went to the city to say, this is what we want to build, that little maquette, that model that Nathan Rappaport made was so abstract that one of the people on the city arts committee said, there's not enough Jewish stuff in here. No one's going to know what it is. It was so abstract, because at that point in time, abstraction was not the visual vocabulary for Holocaust memorials, but it would become so by the 1980s. So the connection to the new Jewish Historical Museum is important for this monument.
Fascinating. Thank you.
And no one had written about this before I did the research. It was kind of like a detective story to find out how it came to be.
Are there any other questions? I have a question, but I want to hold off in case there are any others. So any of you who are not on video, you can feel free to unmute or use your virtual hand in case you do have a question. And so I'll just ask, oh, I'm sorry. I see Deborah or Brian. I don't know which one of you has your...
Hi, it's Deborah at this point. I'm fascinated and appreciative, Natasha, for your talk and to learn about the monument. I've only been to Philadelphia, I think, once, and I can't remember whether it predates the sculpture or not. It's a long time ago. I think it predates it. No. Anyway, that's not my point. My point is that I was fascinated to hear you talk about the piece, not only as the historical object that it is and the history of making it, but also its artistic sort of merits and struggles and finding its place. Over the years, from the Raoul Wallenberg Park in a part of Ottawa to seeing the monument here in Boston, and being in Israel, where there are many, many, many monuments, large and small. I found myself thinking, as you were talking about how unique this was in its era, and then how there's a sort of fatigue that I sometimes feel when I'm sort of bombarded by the imagery. And then I, will have some new experience. I was in Berlin and in Berlin there are two amazing sort of memorials. One is the Jewish Museum, and in it a corner that I'll never forget with faces that are in cast metal that you actually walk on, as if we're walking on the bones and memory of the dead. There it is. That I was overcome, I think, in that space. It was one of those things that was clear in its way and very, very evocative and powerful. And similarly, also in Berlin, the plaza that sits above the museum that has a yes, here we go. Thank you. I'm so glad you can illustrate this, where there's an effort that for me felt right and holy to have this space where the ground was uneven, where the relationship of these stelae were, it was like a crowded Prague Jewish cemetery on the one hand, like buildings and communities that had been and were gone, like bricks that maybe were part of ruins and maybe part of what was new and rising up. And there, my encounter with that was one of sort of feeling it deeply, and then being very much struck by the fact that it's a piece of public space. And there were kids, there were teenagers who were there, and they were laughing and playing and balancing on these things. And it spoke, I don't know, to some sort of contrast that was poignant and irksome for me at the same time, that it talks about how difficult it is to have these sorts of memorials and to translate it into experiences that that people can understand and want to understand.
Yeah, I write about all these spaces in my book. So one of the things that, you said so many great things, I absolutely agree with. One of the things that really interests me in this, Peter Eisenman's memorial, which he originally co-designed with American artist Richard Serra, by the way, who dropped out of the commission, is that you walk through it. And in traditional sculptures, we walk around them to look at them. And this has been a debate since the Renaissance. The Paragonia, it was called at that time. What are the virtues of painting versus sculpture? And one of the virtues of sculpture, according to the proponents of sculpture, was that you can walk around it. But nonetheless, the figures are fairly static and your gaze is only directed in a certain direction. Whereas in this memorial, you can really walk around, you can get lost. And to me, it's the bodily walking through the space that's evocative of memory as you're experiencing this undulation of the ground. So the ground undulates, as does the top of the stele. That's absolutely correct. So walking for me is really important. I always love the fact that kids are running around. I feel like if kids are running around and playing and are comfortable here, maybe later in life, they'll feel okay about coming back. They won't remember it as this burdensome, horrible place, but rather when they're older, they will come back and experience it in yet a different way. I think it's important to take into account the fact that people will experience art in different ways, and especially people of different ages will experience art in different ways. In museums, we're supposed to behave in a certain way, right? We're supposed to be quiet, stand back from the art. Public art's not like that. You put art in public space and it's up for grabs. That's what I love about it. My husband's a museum professional. He deals with the galleries. I deal with the public space.
Wow, what a great question and wonderful response. Are there any other questions? We have time for one more question. Okay. So not seeing any, I'll just ask one final question. And again, thank you so much, Natasha.
You're welcome.
My question is, in the broader sense of Holocaust public discourse, if you could speak a little bit to the context around 1964 when the memorial went up, what else was in the public discourse, if anything, at that time? And I was fascinated to learn about the name of the group of survivors, which I guess as a side question, was that group present in many different cities? But what if anything was in the public eye about the Holocaust around 1964?
Well, I could probably ask a lot of you that question because in the audience, because you know that personally. Certainly when I was growing up in the 70s, the Haggadot always had something about the Holocaust, right? Usually, and maybe it's still today. there's still something about the Holocaust every Passover that one reads about. The Holocaust TV miniseries wasn't until 1979. President Carter's mandate to build a national site of Holocaust memory, that was 1979. You have literature that's being produced. I would say it's literature. The films don't really come out until later. Rabbi, you and I spoke about Shoah. That must have been the mid 80s or so, or early 80s.
The 9-hour.
The 9-hour Claude Lanzmann's film Shoah. And so there just wasn't much in the 1960s. And I think it's really telling that this association of new Jewish Americans even were not calling themselves Holocaust survivors. Yeah. These were Holocaust survivors, but they were not using that terminology.
Yeah, that really.
And in answer to the other question, there were about 15 or 20 different groups such as these in the United States. There was an active group of Warsaw fighters in New York, which was established a little bit earlier. But these were really, social groups. They met, they celebrated together. They created little magazines. I have some of them where they, published children's poetry and talked about the past, but talked about the present. It was a support group in a way that in terms that we would use today. And a lot of times I think that there's this sense that all Holocaust survivors are somehow traumatized, right? That they weren't able to live or function in the world, but many were able to. And Abe Schnapper was one of those people. He was functioning in the world. He loved life. He was filled with a joie de vivre when I met him when he was in his 90s. And he was passionate about this group and meeting with his fellow survivors. So it's an incredible history. There's someone in Australia is writing their dissertation on these groups of Jewish New Americans. And I don't know if that dissertation is done yet, but there's still research being done. There's another wonderful book by Beth Cohen called Case Closed, which is about Holocaust survivors in the United States in the 50s and 60s. And that's how I learned about the historical context of Abe's group, was through her book, that I finally understood why it was called this. It was because I learned that from Beth Cohen's book, Case Closed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. What an enlightening, enriching take and story. Like, again, aside of the story, I don't think we often think about and don't know much about. So I really thank you for bringing this to us. And maybe some of us will be inspired to read your book. And I know we have many artists and people who are interested in art in our community. And as I shared with you, Natasha, I'm excited to bring you all together at some point. I have this dream of doing an art exhibition that is all TOS artists, and then to have our art scholars also be involved. So that's on my bucket list for TOS. And it was really just amazing to have you as one of our members be able to share this insight into this kind of art and this kind of way of holding memory, especially in this week in which we remember. So thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Thank you so much for being here, those here on the Zoom and those in the
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
And be well and safe. We'll see you tomorrow morning at our service if you'd like to join us, and otherwise hope to see you another time soon.